Welcome to Hilary Topper On Air, the podcast you can't afford to miss.
Have you ever thought of doing an Ironman? If you're an endurance athlete or someone who just wants to do one in the future, you need to listen to today's podcast. My next guest has done something incredible, and he's here to share it with you. I'm Hilary Topper, and this is Hilary Topper On Air. My guest today is Will McGough. He is a travel writer at Wake and Wander Media and author of the new book, Swim, Bike, Bonk, Confessions of a Reluctant Triathlete. Will, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your background as a travel writer.
Yeah, totally. So I went to school for journalism back in the day. I did my undergrad at Virginia Tech, then went to Temple University in Philly for grad school in journalism. And, I was originally going to be a normal reporter, go for politics or hard news, but I learned very quickly that's kind of a depressing lifestyle, as those of you who watch the news may have figured out. So yeah, travel was just so much more fun. And, I started off small doing a couple assignments here and there when I was living out in California, but eventually got really hooked and just wanted to see the world and thought it was a really cool industry to get into. So yeah, I've been a travel writer now for 10 years and started out small, just contributing to websites and things like that, but have had a nice career of it and now contribute to a lot of the major travel magazines and airline magazines. And it's been a fun ride taking me around the world. Daily journalism can get, it's very demanding. It's very, it's exciting because you're working on different stories all the time, but you're a bit scattered. So over the past few years, I've been looking to get more into book writing and sort of doing bigger projects. So here we are today. But yeah, all my background is in telling stories from around the world, not only destination coverage, but people and profiles and food. And I like to write, try and write about things I like: hiking, outdoors, beer, culture, history. So yeah, and then somehow randomly ended up doing a book about triathlons. How that?
Yeah. So that's why we're here today. We want to talk about Swim, Bike, Bonk, and I want you to tell me how you decided to do an Ironman without ever doing a sprint or Olympic triathlon.
Oh, okay. Well, so like I was saying, I was trying to sort of break into the book world and, just via networking and things like that. And I ended up coming across a publisher and meeting them and getting introduced to them. And so we were discussing certain ideas, none of which worked out, but, we kind of had each other's ear and we're talking. And, I'm based out here in Hawaii where the Ironman is really a huge thing. You can't live in Hawaii and not know about the Ironman. So it's always been something that had circulated through me when I traveled to the Big Island. I had seen the course. The Ironman actually started here on Oahu, which not a lot of people know. So, it's been around. And then, so I've just kind of listened to it and watched it grown over the past couple of years. And then sort of hearing stories about from people here in Hawaii about its origins and how small it used to be and now what it's become. It was kind of just always of interest to me. I had some friends that got into it, just people I had met throughout the world. And then, of course, you see people sporting the brand on their bodies, whether on T-shirts or via tattoos. And this thing just kind of always stuck out to me. And so eventually, it came to be here in Hawaii. They were celebrating the 40th anniversary back in, 2018, so a year ago. And so it was kind of a big deal out here. So the media of it increased, et cetera. And so it just, leading up to that, it was such a big thing. And so it was kind of a perfect storm where they were gearing up for this 40th anniversary and sort of talking about that. It had come into the media more. And at the same time, I was talking to publisher about book ideas. So we kind of just brought it up randomly in a brainstorming session. My publisher does mostly sports books. So we were talking about a lot of other ideas related to different events around the world. But once the Ironman and triathlons came up, this conversation just kind of took on a new life. And it was like, yeah, what about this has kind of made it go from a 15-person event 40 years ago to now an event that, they have, I think, over 40 full-length Ironmans per year now around the world. 2,000 people are competing in each one. It's like, wow, it's $850 at the time just to enter. It's like, wow, I'm paying. That's like I could do a vacation for that much. But I'm signing up to, like now compete in this crazy event. Like what drives these people to do this? And yeah, like you're right. I had never done a triathlon before. I had never really been involved in this. I'd been around it, as I say, being here in Hawaii, but also my sister was a marathon runner. She had competed in the Boston Marathon a couple times. So I was kind of familiar with the long distance thing. And I kind of got interested, just like, hey, what about this is so special? So this sort of brought up the conversation. And then originally the plan was to do just kind of a historical account. Like, okay, let's look into this. Let's retrace the 40 years. Let's see, let's start with Gordon Haller, for example, who ended up being a big part of the book. Let's start with him. Let's kind of talk about what it used to be like. Let's trace the steps to how it became what it is today. And then just write a book about that. And then, so that's the first discussion. And then I'm used to being a travel journalist. I'm used to immersing myself in things that I do. So I'm like, okay, maybe I should, as part of this, as part of the research, get involved. Let me, at least start training. Let me maybe even sign up for one. In the beginning, and so I thought, I want to put myself in the shoes, so let me get involved and meet some of these people. And all the time that I'm discussing this with my publisher, he's like, yeah, sounds great. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is a book, right? This is a big project. So it's going to be published a year or two from now, which ended up being a correct assumption. It's kind of a long timeline with when it comes to publication, but just in terms of submitting the manuscript, I thought we had a lot of time. And so as I'm mind mapping this, I'm kind of thinking, okay, here we are in the summer of 2017. I'll start doing my research on the history. I'll talk to people. I'll start joining some training groups. I'll get involved in this over the course of the next year. And then, maybe next summer or next fall, I'll try an Ironman, maybe if I can. And then, we'll just see what happens. But then, like, right when we're doing all the paperwork for the book, like, okay, good to go. I find out, oh, and by the way, here we are in August of 2017. Your book has to be turned in by the start of the new year. And I'm like, oh, wait, what? And so now I was kind of in this position where I had to, only a certain, very short amount of time, half year basically, to do the entire project. And so I had to make a decision like, okay, am I going to, of course I can start training, but if I really never attempt the event, what does that do? So finally, after a lot of internal debate and struggle and just being like, oh, geez, am I really going to do this? I decided, I looked up, and the last Ironman of the year that I could realistically attend was in Arizona in November. So here we are, end of July, early August, and it was just like, all right, let's give it a go. Let's try it. And so when you read the book, it's kind of like, okay, well, why did you put yourself in this position? Well, I kind of never meant to, quite honestly. But it turned out to be cool because, as we can get into it, this issue of time turned out to be a very motivating factor for me, which I think is extremely important when you're doing something like this. So really, it was just my curiosity in the beginning that was like, hey, let's take a look at this. And then it was just sort of idiocracy on my part of not understanding how things worked. This is my first book. I just assumed like, books take a long time. And they do take a long time to come out.
Yeah.
Here we are in 2019 and we're just getting released. But in terms of the whole process, it's sort of a hurry up and wait. So anyway, yeah, I got thrust into it, but it all worked out. It came to be kind of a cool drive for the book, not only for myself, but, sort of an interesting narrative of a pace for the book, if you might say. Yeah.
So Will, tell us, our listeners who don't know what an Ironman entails, what actually it is.
Okay, so basically it's billed as the toughest and most, challenging, Ironman itself would say the most iconic, quote unquote, triathlon on the planet. So triathlon is just a general name, as you guys know, for swim, bike, run. You're going to swim for a certain amount of time, then jump on the bike, and then jump on the run. But the Ironman takes us to the extreme, and it's very long distance. So it's a 2.4 mile swim followed by a 112 mile bike, and then a full marathon at the end. And these seem like arbitrary distances, but originally, and I kind of go through this in the book, the race was started here on Oahu, and it was the combination of 3 races that already existed. The Waikiki Rough Water Swim, which I take part of as part of my training in the book, the Around Oahu bike race, and then the Honolulu Marathon. So it was basically this group of people here. They were just all part of the same running clubs and swimming clubs. And as the creation story goes, which I take with a big grain of salt, these things tend to be refined over time. But these swimmers, bikers, and runners were all hanging and elbow jabbing each other like, hey, who's the better athlete? Who's tougher? And then finally, I guess they decided, well, let's do this wacky thing where we all, we combine these 3 races and we'll see who's the best. And talking to Gordon Haller, who he won the first Ironman, and he ended up writing the foreword for my book, kind of explaining the difference. It's fascinating to see that from his perspective, his role in running and participating in the first race versus what he sees now 40 years later. But also I interviewed him for a lot of training advice and stuff. And it was just for fun. It was something that they weren't really taking seriously. All these guys were in shape to begin with, so it wasn't like they were training for this event. And then now you compare that with today, where people, thousands and thousands of people all over the world are dedicating their entire year, their whole social calendar, or anti-social calendar, as I like to say, to training for these things, right? And it's just like their whole focus and goal. And so the Ironman is basically it's the pinnacle of every triathlon. And it's like, if you want to do the hardest and craziest triathlon, this is the one for you.
All right. Before we move on, I just have to say I am so appreciative of our sponsors and must take this moment out to thank them. Please support our sponsors and tell them that you heard about them on Hilary Topper On Air. Special thanks to the Russo Law Group, NetPro, the Profit Express, Strain Print, and Fortunoff Fine Jewelry. Now back to you, Will. Was there a moment when you thought to yourself as you're training that you weren't going to be able to make it to the starting line of the event?
Pretty much the entire time. Yeah, there was pretty much constant doubt. But as you'll see in the book, everybody, it was so frustrating because in the beginning, everybody I talked to, really stressed the importance of the mental aspect, right? And one person even said to me, it's 90% mental and 10% physical. And I was like, oh, well, great. Like, then I'm cool because anybody could do it. But then at the same time, everybody was kind of ragging on me about how I didn't have enough time to do this. I was so insane on this short 3-month timeline to even attempt this. So I was just very confused because on one hand, it's like, hey, you don't have enough time to train. And then on the other hand, people are like, it's 90% mental. I'm like, okay, well, that's pretty contradictory. But so I had quite a bit of trouble actually, I did make a really big point to stay, as positive as I could. So even when I came up against roadblocks, I was kind of like, all right, this is like, it's just a hurdle. It's not a wall. I'm going to find a way to get around it. Like I really, and you'll see in the book, I'm my own therapist, I talk myself through it a lot. But I suffered a lot of nagging injuries. And I actually had one injury that I was very concerned about. I had an IT band problem that I think like up until, maybe a month before the race, I'd only run, like 8 miles. I wasn't upping my mileage very much. I could barely get through it. And it wasn't until the last month that I really started to be able to run better. And then there were many times I thought, I knew I was going to get to the starting line because I was just committed to being there. And, and that's the thing with the Ironman. Like, think about this, you pay $850 to enter this event. Then I'm coming from Hawaii to Arizona, so I'm paying $600, $700, $800 for the flight there. Then I got to book 5 nights at a hotel. That's $150, $200 a night. So I'm already spending, I bought my bike. I bought like all my gear. I've told all my family and friends that I'm doing this. I've dedicated, just for me, 3 months, but most people are dedicating a year to this.
Yeah.
So really, like, no matter what you're coming up against, like, you're going to be on the starting line, right? Because you've already invested so much to this event that for you not to go is pretty much not an option. I mean, at least for me, it was like, okay, God, like so I always knew that I would get to the starting race. It just was a matter of like, how much confidence would I show up with? And that really wavered at different times. And it's such an up and down cycle that you go through when you're doing this high intensity, long distance training, that one day you feel like you can conquer the world. And then just the next day you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, how am I gonna finish this?
Now, you didn't use a coach, right? So you did this all yourself. You figured out your training and that type of thing. I mean, I guess, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I looked into coaches a lot. I've run my own business for 10 years. My friends will tell you that I don't know what the word they would use. I'm not very good at, like, I'm not going to work in academia. I'm not really good at following, like, protocols, I guess. So for me, it was just like all about like, the idea of inviting a coach into my life and them being like, okay, Will, you have to do this at this time, was kind of like, it's not for me. But, also I ran into what I think a lot of triathletes run into, and that's just scheduling.
Yeah.
So I'm a writer, and I sort of take this to the extreme because I had things on my side and things not. I'm a writer, so I work from home. So like I make my own schedule. I can train in the morning, in the afternoon, at night. I don't have a 9 to 5 where I have to carve out time on a weekend necessarily, or after, between 5 and 8 or something. So I have that to my benefit, but I also travel a lot, obviously, as a travel writer. So I'm on the road 2 weeks a month, and sometimes when I'm here in Hawaii, I'm out in the field. So I don't have necessarily a set schedule where I could be like, okay, let me welcome this coach into my life every Tuesday or every Tuesday, Thursday, just because, okay, like I'm in Samoa, like I'm on the mainland, I'm in Europe. So I didn't have that, that sort of drive. And then, quite honestly, like what I really had to my advantage is the internet. There's so much information available.
Yeah.
I just thought like a coach could be, quite honestly, like I didn't really have the budget for it. Just, these things get expensive. I mean, you're hiring a coach, you're talking about a couple $100 a month. And I know for me it's short term, but just it all started to add up. Like I already talked about some of these costs, the entry fee, the flight. You're talking about thousands of dollars. So at some point you got to stop the bleeding. And and just with my schedule, and this is what makes the Ironman so challenging. And I think this is why, or part of the reason many people, spread out their training over such a long period of time. Obviously you need to build a base and get to a point where you can sustain these distances. But, it's also just like a scheduling nightmare. Like you want to have a life, right? And this is, we connected about this before, which is, kind of funny. Like we talk about how do you have a life when you do this Ironman? Because it's constantly training, constantly thinking about your next workout, constantly, how am I going to make this deadline, so to speak, or to this, to show up on race day ready.
And your spouse or your partner doesn't want to hear about it that much.
No, they don't. They don't want to hear about it. And you're missing another happy hour, or another birthday. I really went into it like dedicated to not allowing it to mess up my social schedule, because I wanted to have a life. I didn't want this to, but as you see in the book, like that was successful on one hand, but not successful on the other. And, this was the whole point of the book, right? Like I'm so glad I made even the short time, training timeline, while interesting for readers, was really hard on me. But I'm so glad I did it, because it brought all these issues into extreme focus of what triathletes have to deal with, and things you can't really understand until you're in it. Like something like, you're training for this epic adventure, and if your spouse is not along with you, or your whatever, they're like, first off, the number one question people ask me is like, what the hell is an Ironman? You know, they don't know what it is. And then two, it's like, why would you do that? Like, what? Like, what? Like, okay, like you want to join a running club or something, like that makes sense. Like you want to do a sprint triathlon that's, you know, a Saturday. Okay. Like what, you know, why would you do this like most epic thing? Like, this is not like, why would you want to put yourself through this? Like, what do you have to prove, you know? And for me, putting myself into this community and sort of getting through those issues and investigating that and kind of discovering why people do this and, you know, their motivations and then how they piece their life together. And quite honestly, like, if you are able to set your lifestyle up to even get to the starting line of an Ironman, I tip my hat to you, because in a way that's almost harder than the race, because the race is one day, you know, you have to finish it in less than 17 hours. So it's like you get out there and you spend one day, you leave it all in the field, so to speak. The hardest work is juggling all this stuff beforehand. Like, how are you going to get your training up to speed? How are you going to explain to your significant other that you're not available another weekend because you're going on a 75-mile bike ride, you know? Like, how are you going to explain like all this stuff, you know? Like, it's a total lifestyle. And that's something I really came to understand, is that this is not something you can really do part-time necessarily, if you want to truly be involved and if you want to, you know, take yourself to a point where you're participating. I mean, some people do these things, do one a year, you know. This is a lifestyle for them.
Oh yeah.
And that was just really fascinating to see, and that was magnified in the short time that, you know, I had to experience it.
Well, I read the book Swim, Bike, Bonk, Confessions of a Reluctant Triathlete, and I absolutely loved it. I would highly recommend this book. And Will, you are an amazing writer and really, you know, just took the reader on a journey with you. Can you tell people how they can get in touch with you or learn more about Swim, Bike, Bonk, Confessions of a Reluctant Triathlete?
Yeah, sure. I'm glad you like the book, for sure. And thanks for reading it and for sharing it with your audience. So if the best way to find it is on Amazon. If you, you know, I hate to use the local lingo, but just Google Swim, Bike, Bonk. And then my name, Will McGough, McGoughh, that'll come up. And then my company is Wake and Wander, like wake up and wander around. So you can find me on the internet as well if you want to shoot me an email if you have any questions or anything like that. But if you're just interested in the book, Swim, Bike, Bonk on Amazon, you'll be good to go. And I look forward to your feedback. And it was quite a journey. And I appreciate you saying that. You know, my writing style is very, I just want to talk to you and just tell you what happened. And I think that's refreshing. And at least that's what I'm trying to accomplish. So I'm glad that you enjoyed that. And I hope your audience does as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on the show and taking the time out. And I also want to thank our sponsors, the Russo Law Group, the Profit Express, Strain Print, and Fortune Fine Jewelry. And last but not least, I want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in. If you want more information on this show or any other show, visit our website at hilarytopperonair.com, or you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, you name it, we're out there. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.